Did you know that there's a disturbing backstory to this children's book? This is Eric and Corey Richens, and they live together with their 3 young children in Utah. Eric had a renovation business, and Corey was a real estate agent. On March 4th of 2022, around 3:22 a.m., Corey called 911 after walking into her room, and according to her, she saw Eric lying on the ground and he just looked cold to the touch. Once officers and paramedics arrived at the scene, they did pronounce him dead. Corey stated that that night she made a vodka drink for her husband to celebrate that she had sold a house. She then stated she went to go lay down with one of her children in their room because they were having nightmares, and she returned to her and her husband's room around 3 a.m. and that's when she found Eric on the floor. An autopsy was done on Eric, and it revealed that he died after ingesting 5 times the lethal dose of fentanyl. Not long after Eric's death, Corey had published a children's book called Are You With Me? And this was catered towards children who were grieving after losing one of their parents. Investigators ended up looking through Corey's phone, and that's when they saw text messages between her and another person buying drugs for them to poison Eric. This was not the first time that Corey tried to poison Eric, just the other times she just did not succeed. Supposedly, Eric wanted a divorce from Corey, and just a few weeks before his death, he has changed his will and life insurance policy. Eric had told his family many times, if something happens to me, it's my wife's fault. Corey was arrested and is currently sitting in jail waiting on trial.
A story that just continues to keep me up at night is what happened to the Yuba County Five. In 1978, there were 5 men that were coming from a basketball game in Chico back down to Yuba City in the middle of the night. Now, all 5 of the men suffered from mild intellectual and psychological disability. You're never gonna know why they did this, but for some reason, when they were on the highway, they got off of the highway and went onto a dirt back road in the Plumas National Forest. Is that for whatever reason, they eventually got out of their car and started walking on foot, and they vanished. Police eventually found that car and they expected something's wrong with this. Not the case. The car had gas and it was working fine, so why did they get out of it and walk through the woods? Nobody knew what happened to them until eventually somebody stumbled into this cabin. Quick before I get into it, if you want the full episode on this, you can listen to it on Creep Time, the podcast. Inside that cabin was the body of Ted Wire, and he had lost 80 pounds. Didn't make any sense because the cabin was full of food. Eventually they found everyone's body except for Gary Mathias.
This 74-year-old woman robbed a bank after she was scammed of her life savings. This all happened in Ohio when Ann Mayers walked inside a credit union with a face mask on and demanded that the bank teller give her money while she threatened them with a gun. She ended up only taking $500, and then she got in her car and drove off. It only took police 2 hours to find Ann in her home, and when they arrived, she was gardening and pretended like she had no idea what was going on. She eventually admitted to the crime, and it turns out that Ann was recently scammed out of thousands of dollars online and owed a lot of money to family and friends. And because of that, she became pretty desperate and felt like her only way out of this mess was to rob a bank and thought that she would get away with it. Her sister also told police that Ann was going around telling family members that she was going to do this, but everyone thought that she was only joking. She was charged with aggravated robbery with a firearm and tampering with evidence and is being held on a $100,000 bond.
The UK's heaviest man, Jason Holton, has just passed away 1 week before his 34th birthday. His heartbroken mother said that he began overeating as a teenager after his father passed away, and at one point he was eating roughly 10,000 calories a day. Over the years, his weight increased to the point where his legs could no longer hold him, and after becoming bedridden, he didn't leave his room for a staggering 6 months. He said he would cry every day because he felt like he had imprisoned himself. At that point, he weighed around 317 kg, or for those who in the US, 700 pounds. In 2020, his organs began to shut down, and he had to be airlifted by a crane from his mother's 3rd floor flat by a team of more than 30 firemen and engineers. When he got to the hospital, doctors said that they wanted to send him to London Zoo to get a heart scan because the only machine big enough to hold him was used by vets for very large animals. Luckily, thanks to his treatment at hospital, his condition began to stabilize. But 4 years later, he was rushed to hospital yet again. But this time, doctors said that they couldn't save him, and he had about a week left to live. The coroner's report stated on Tuesday he died from organ failure and obesity at only 33 years old.
This woman got 0 prison time after stabbing her boyfriend 108 times. In 2018, 26-year-old Chad O'Melia's life was savagely taken in his apartment in California by his girlfriend. 33-year-old Bryn Spetcher says that on this day, she was tricked by Chad into smoking a highly potent strain of marijuana, which caused her to go into psychosis. She says that she remembers immediately walking into the kitchen and grabbing several knives and stabbed her dog before going after Chad and taking his life. Bryn then turned a knife on herself and attempted to take her own life before police arrived. And authorities also said that it wasn't easy restraining Bryn and that the taser didn't even work on her. Now, Bryn's defense argues that she reacted this way because she only smoked less than 6 times in her life, which that combined with the high potent marijuana explains why she took her boyfriend's life. Bryn ended up only receiving just 2 years of probation, 100 hours of community service, and no prison time.
This pastor is being accused of unaliving his own wife. This case is currently ongoing, but it's been so highly suggested, so this is what we know so far. On April 28th, Pastor John Paul Miller made the shocking announcement at the end of his church service that his wife Micah had unalived herself. He then asked everyone to leave quietly and not discuss his wife's death. Micah's family and friends do not believe this cause of death and have taken to social media with the hashtag Justice for Micah. John Paul also wrote Micah's obituary where he talked mostly about himself, not even Micah, who was the one that passed away. He also painted their marriage as like a perfect relationship, which is really odd considering that Micah filed for divorce and a restraining order against her husband only days before her passing. In the weeks prior to Micah's passing, she was sharing on Facebook about abusive relationships and really just hinting that something wasn't right. A friend of Micah's has come out and confirmed that Micah told her that there was abuse in the marriage and also that church funds were being used for things not church related. And since more friends and family of Micah have come out with similar accounts. Also been some speculation that John Paul was having an affair, a years-long affair with this woman that he's been seen in the days before and the days after Micah's death. That woman's husband also passed away in a really suspicious way, but that's just online speculation for right now. The investigation is currently ongoing, so hopefully we have answers really, really soon. But in the meantime, make sure to leave all your thoughts, theories, questions, and case suggestions in the comments for me.
The FBI caught a serial killer whose goal was to become a beast or an animal, specifically a bear/saber-toothed tiger hybrid. He had built himself a beast suit that he was using to maul his victims. When the FBI was originally looking at the bodies of the deceased, they thought it was a regular animal mauling. However, they soon realized it was fossilized skulls that were making these impressions. This led them to investigate Randall Tier, a man who was working at an anthropology department at a museum. He engineered the suit himself at his house, and he used parts of bones that he was stealing from his museum job. However, Randall Tier is also a victim in this situation, because when he was younger, he was seeing a psychiatrist for these urges that he was having to become a beast, but his psychiatrist was none other than Hannibal Lecter. Hannibal Lecter is far from an ethical psychiatrist and actually used psychic driving to make Randall Tier become the beast that he is today. He actively encouraged Randall's urges to become a beast and even gave him ideas on how to do this and how to be sneaky about it. And that's another reason why Hannibal Lecter is so evil, and I make this point all the time. Because Hannibal Lecter is not just a serial killer, he's not just eating people, he is actively incubating other serial killers as his career goes on as a psychiatrist.
How far would you go to get more guac at Chipotle? Because this man shot an employee at Chipotle over his serving size. On April 5th, 32-year-old Aaron Brown walked into a Chipotle in Southfield, Michigan to order some food and then insulted an employee when he wasn't served enough guac. Aaron was then seen on surveillance video going around the counter and packing his order with more guac until a worker knocked the guac out of his hand. That's when Aaron grabbed the 21-year-old worker and slammed him into the fridge and shot him in the knee. And while all the customers were terrified and ran out the restaurant, Aaron was seen calmly collecting his food and drove off without speeding. But Aaron didn't even make it too far, since this Chipotle was located across the street from the police station and he was arrested. He was charged and was being held in the Oakland County Jail on a $20,000 bond, and all for some guac.
Do you think that you would be able to predict if someone in your life is or could become a serial killer? Is there a trait that they all have in common? Is there a recipe that creates a serial killer? Are they born evil? Is it a product of their environment? Some experts believe that there is a recipe, the McDonald's triad, which are 3 elements that are the key to predict if someone will grow up to become a serial killer. Being cruel to animals, setting things on fire, and wetting the bed after the age of 5. Many experts also say that a serial killer's childhood holds the key and believe that nearly 100% of serial killers experience some kind of mistreatment in their childhood. I find really interesting because some of the most infamous serial killers, Ted Bundy, Jeffrey Dahmer, Paul Bernardo, all claim to have come from really loving childhoods. Turns out that head trauma in adolescence could also be a big factor. Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker, David Berkowitz, son of Sam, and Fred West, and many others all experienced some kind of extreme head trauma in their adolescence that resulted in a change of behavior. So it's pretty well known that the majority of serial killers are white men between the ages of 25 and 34, but did you know a majority of serial killers are from the United States? By like a ridiculous majority. These statistics are so scary. For my astrology girlies, most serial killers are either Virgos or Geminis. New York is the state with the most serial killers, and most serial killers are born in November than any other month. Statistically, you are more likely to become a serial killer if you're the eldest child and the least likely if you are an only child. Also more likely to become a serial killer if you are left-handed. What do you think makes a serial killer? Do you think it's genetics or bad childhood or just because they are left-handed? And is there anyone in your life that maybe you're looking at a little bit differently now? Let me know in the comments.
So if you didn't know, this woman's name is Brianna Williams, and what you just watched was her reaction to finding out that the police had discovered her sinister secret. So back in early November of 2019, Brianna contacts the police in order to report her 5-year-old daughter, Taylor Williams, missing, stating that she had seen her the night before, but in the morning she was gone. Taylor's disappearance sent shockwaves through the community, and people quickly began looking for her, but she was nowhere to be found. However, weeks into the investigation, doubts begin to surface as detectives realize Brianna's story just doesn't make sense. Then, all of a sudden, Taylor's remains are found 400 miles away from her house, with investigators ruling that her cause of death was starvation, meaning Brianna had unalived her. At this point, Brianna knows that the police had figured out what she had done, so she tries to unalive herself, but this fails and she gets arrested. In court, Brianna is found guilty of Taylor's death and is sentenced to a well-deserved life in prison. Brianna's story shows that you cannot escape justice and that karma will always catch up to you.
Missing American and Australian surfers were just found dead in a well in Mexico. Behind me is Callum and Jake Robinson and Jack Rode. They were missing for about a week and then they were found dead in a well in Ensenada, Mexico. They all disappeared on April 28th. They were last seen in Baja California surfing. One of the family members got worried because one of the men were a type 1 diabetic and he hadn't communicated for a while, which was out of character for him. Then on Saturday, May 4th, all of the men were found inside of a well and a 4th man was also found, but he was unrelated to these 3. Apparently the 4th random man's body had been there for a long time, so I'm assuming this is kind of a reoccurring thing that was happening. They were killing people and stuffing them in the well here. Police believe these men were killed by thieves trying to steal things from their trucks, such as tires, catalytic converters, stuff like that. All 3 men were fatally shot and dumped inside of the well. And 3 men in connection with his death have been arrested. Names have not been released yet. And apparently this well was boarded up, making it nearly impossible to find. Let me know what you guys think about the story in the comment section below. And as always, these videos are for informational purposes only.
Warning: viewer discretion is advised. In April 2015, Shayna Sims arrived at a funeral home posing as a makeup artist. A 38-year-old woman called Tabitha had recently passed from natural causes and Shayna was there to work on the body. While she was there, instead of making the body look presentable for her funeral, Shayna carved off one of Tabitha's breasts and cut off one of her toes. She tore clumps of Tabitha's hair out, smeared her makeup, and then slashed her face. She even stole the shoes off Tabitha's feet before leaving. The attack was discovered by two horrified members of the funeral home who raced to tell the manager about what they had found. The police later arrested Shayna, and she was found with a folding knife with strands of Tabitha's hair still attached to it, as well as a pair of scissors, a box cutter, and various makeup items. During the trial, it was revealed that Shayna had snapped after learning that her husband was apparently having an affair with Tabitha. Seething with anger, she took brutal revenge on her love rival and was found guilty of mutilating a body, interrupting a funeral, and unlawful removal of a body part from a deceased person. Shayna Sims was sentenced to 16 years in prison, but was released after only serving 4.
Update, Jade's ruining the vacations with her TikToks.
That was the last TikTok ever posted by TikToker Anthony Barajas, aka Anthony Michael. On July 26, 2021, Anthony and his friend Riley were seeing a movie. On that evening, they were seeing the ironically violent film The Forever Purge, which itself is a critique on American violence. On that day, the two of them were just sitting inside of the theater enjoying the film when suddenly they were both shot in the back of the head. Now, sadly, Riley Goodrich, who was 18 at the time, would die at the scene, but Anthony, who was 19 at the time, was taken to a hospital but passed away a few days later. But why did this happen? Well, it's not a very clear story. So this is Joseph Jimenez, and he was actually arrested the day after the murder. He was the guy who pulled the trigger. Now, Joseph's friends were actually in the movie theater. There were only 6 people in the theater at the time. And they said that during the movie, Joseph was acting strange, he was mumbling to himself, and at one point he left the theater and came back in with some sort of a package. Joseph's friends then left the theater because they were afraid of what he might do, and a few moments later they saw Joseph running out of the side door, getting into his vehicle and speeding away. So it turns out that Joseph had just randomly decided to murder Riley and Anthony. There was no motivation, he didn't know these two, he just decided he had to kill somebody. And strangely, their bodies weren't discovered until after the movie was over, because there was only 6 people in the theater, including Joseph, his 3 friends, and these 2. So according to Joseph, he was hearing voices that were saying his friends and family were going to be killed if he didn't take a life. He also stated that he wished he didn't do it, but unfortunately, you can't take back an action like that. It's just chilling that even just sitting in a movie theater, an act of violence like this can strike you. And obviously, rest in peace to Riley and Anthony. This is such a tragic story.
The reason that I felt Von was a serial killer, because I've come across people that have killed a lot of people in gang wars before. You know, I did the video about No Limit, G Herbo's crew. There's a guy called Mad Max that, you know, they say he had 9 or 10 bodies, right? But I think, for me, where I felt he became a serial killer was you got these multiple murders. There's more than 3 murders, they're more than a month apart, some of them are years apart. It was really like, when he became famous, the personal gratification that he seemed to get out of killing, I would say he was responsible for the murder of FBG Duck, in a way that he felt responsible. He tweeted a goat emoji like minutes after Duck was killed. You know, he got a lot of personal gratification out of these killings. I think he wanted to continue these killings, and he wanted the whole world to know. I wish I'd have thought of this when I made the documentary. I've only thought of it after, but I feel like I feel like he's the closest I could describe him to a traditional serial killer is the Zodiac Killer. Because Von killed all these people, he became famous, he wanted everyone to know that he killed all these people. You know, you ain't a killer if you only got 2 bodies. Like, talk about bodies, I got a few, 4 plus 3, 3 plus 2. Like, Von wanted the whole world to know that he was killing. He was putting out these codes. He was getting this personal gratification from killing, and he still wanted to kill. He wanted to have Duck killed. He wanted to have Man killed. There was a supposed rumored body in Atlanta. Now, I kind of disproved that in the video, but it's like, he wanted people to know he was a killer. I think he was more interested in getting people killed than rapping.
Here's what Baby Reindeer didn't tell you. Unless you've been living under a rock for the past few weeks, you will probably have heard of Baby Reindeer. It's a new series on Netflix, which is a harrowing account of abuse and stalking. Now, it's told by the actual victim in this case, who plays himself. However, there are a few things that have been missed out. Now, Richard Gadd, as I said, was the victim in this case and told the story by playing himself. But Richard was actually a lot more successful than he gave himself credit for in the drama. He featured as an actor on Outlander and Click, and he also more recently co-wrote an episode of Sex Education. Obviously, we know Martha's real name and identity were left out of the series. Richard also intentionally changed elements of her character. He said that he wanted to change bits of her life, as well as obviously using a different name for her in the series, so that she wouldn't be hounded in real life. He actually wanted to prevent people from harassing the real stalker. Another element that was left out of the story were exactly how many messages his stalker left for him. Now, Richard has since stated that there were over 41,000 emails, 744 tweets, and 46 Facebook messages from 4 different Facebook accounts. He stated that the total length of all of the voicemails that the real Martha left for him totaled over 350 hours. She also sent him 106 pages of actual physical letters, which we never saw in the series. Richard stated that not only did his stalker send him emails, Facebook messages, and tweets, she actually also sent him physical gifts. These gifts included an actual baby reindeer toy as a present, and she also sent him sleeping tablets and boxers.
Another true crime story of how they were caught. Lee Hartley, a lieutenant in the Navy, was on a carrier warship when he started feeling ill, started having stomach cramps and vomiting. He would get better, but then get sick again, and it got so bad he had to get flown out to Florida, where he later died in the hospital. A savvy doctor noticed that all his organs had been so damaged that he suspected there might be heavy metal poisoning, and he requested that at an autopsy. Because of that doctor, they tested for possible poisons, and they found that there was arsenic in his system. Now police had to look at 4,000 possible suspects aboard the ship. Police scoured all over the ship but couldn't find the source of the arsenic. Police were also able to learn that while he was in Spain 3 months before his death, he was also feeling ill along with another shipmate. Police also found out when the ship stopped in Spain, his wife had actually flown out to meet with him for 8 days. She had cooked both men breakfast before they fell ill. Police interviewed his wife Pamela, and she denied involvement and would pass a polygraph test, and the case would go cold for 13 years. Then in 1995, police reopened the investigation and started interviewing people close to the family. Police interviewed Pam's brother, who actually said she had recruited him to try to kill her husband, but he refused. Arsenic is retained in the fingernails and hair of victims longer, so forensics were able to look at a strand of his hair to get a timeline of when he ingested the arsenic and how long he'd been exposed to it. Police determined that his wife Pamela sent him care packages when he was on deployment, and through those hair samples learned that he first got ill just a few weeks when he was on his deployment. He was then sick in Spain when his wife was there. Police believe the victim consumed baked goods from his wife while he was on ship, and he continued to fall ill before he was hospitalized. Police also noted that Pam visited him in the hospital in Florida, and the arsenic samples spiked yet again while she was there with him. Police interrogated Pamela and confronted her with the evidence and information, and she quickly confessed. She told police she loved her husband so much she didn't want to break his heart by getting a divorce. What's crazy is she was charged with second-degree murder, would get a 40-year sentence, but would be released after 16 years. But that was how she was caught.